Wait for it, and we're live. And this time we're actually live, like live, not just saying that before we record. But hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator, geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies, a place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction, and since Katie's here, the dragons in there somewhere too. So, all right. So Katie, for obviously most of your people watching, I would hope know who you are, but for anyone catching it that doesn't, can you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Katie Cross. As JR said, I love dragons, but even more, I love writing young adult fantasy books with dragons and witches and magic. And I always love coming back to Blasters and Blades. That's my third favorite thing.
We'll take it. Top three. All right. So the next part of the introduction, dear listener, dear viewers at home, is how we first found each other. And Katie and I have been talking to each other for so long through author communities that how we first met has been lost to the vagaries of time. And I don't want to contemplate how long that's been. So we're just going to move right on and pretend it was yesterday.
I'm pretty sure it involved your mom reading my book, right? Just want to clear that up.
Yeah, she did read your book. I don't know if that was first because we also met in Vegas at the 20 Bucks.
That's right.
I don't know which was first.
Doesn't matter anymore. It's all history.
We'll take it. But she did read your book, so that's a win. In fact, you sent me a signed one after we met, and she stole it from me. I mean, she liberated it.
She's a good lady. The kids that had dragons, right? So,
dragons. So, all right. So, before we get started talking about all the things, we're going to do the religion question because it is a Blasters and Blades podcast, and we can't not. But since you've answered all the standard ones, we're going to make it seasonally appropriate. So, what is your favorite costume, specifically one that you've worn in your Halloween career?
Oh, so my favorite costume is actually a medieval dress that's red. I actually think I have it here. I'm in my closet, y'all. That is for my character, Bianca. So it's this one right here. It's a dress that I could have seen her wear. So this is my favorite right here. It's got lots of fun stuff. So it's a really red dress. It looks really medieval. And I wore it to cosplay my main character, Bianca, which is super fun.
Nice. So you bought it specifically to cosplay Bianca?
Yeah. I got it online. It took 6 weeks to get to my house, and it was like $100, but totally worth it.
So what all did you pair with it?
I think I went barefoot. No, just kidding. Bianca goes barefoot. So if you know Bianca, it's a, if you know, you know. I think I just wore sandals and then I had my hair down because Bianca's super minimalistic, right? She wears her dresses and she runs in the forest. So it was my favorite costume because it was also super simple.
Yeah, I've seen some of the medieval Ren Fair type stuff. Well, I don't know what the article of clothing, it almost looks like a corset, but they wear it outside of the clothing that accents the colors for effect. I guess I don't know, corset, girdle, whatever. But I've seen a lot of the Ren Fair stuff. Girdle. I am not up on the verbology of ladies' fashion. Okay. Forgive me. And I don't write the kind of things that require me to know. I just it was a uniform and we move on. That's the great thing about the military side of things is everyone's the same clothing wise, so you don't have to pay attention.
Yeah. I mean, there's it's kind of annoying to keep up with it all, and cosplay is this whole other world, so you're forgiven. It's fine.
Yeah, some of the fantasy ones though, when they start using modern clothing in their fantasy, I'm like, you're kind of pulling me out though, because I've started reading more fantasy lately. Mm-hmm. I had surgery recently that removed the last of the shrapnel that was in my leg from Iraq, and since that was gone, it's kind of freeing. So I'm like, I don't need to dwell on that anymore. So suddenly I decided to read a lot of fantasy instead of the mill sci-fi I had been reading. I don't know why they're connected in my head, and so I've been reading some of them, and for some reason they're like, I'm wearing a t-shirt. I'm like, no, this is medieval. What the heck is a t-shirt? They don't have those.
Yeah.
Right? It's weird. You gotta make it fit. So
yeah.
All right. And because we do more than one religion question, so you've talked about your favorite costume. What is the favorite costume either you've put your kids in or you've seen come to your door on a trick-or-treater?
I told my kids that this year I was going to put them in garbage bags and stuff them full of newspapers and call them a raisin, and they weren't super happy about that. So we're not doing that this year. Last year, I think my daughter, she probably dressed up as some kind of princess. She's 6. My son is 9. He likes to go as either a ninja or a football player. I think I honestly love any costume that they do because my husband does their makeup, their face makeup for it. Nice. And he's actually really good at it. So it's fun to see him doing that. And I love to see what is so important to them that they would dress up for it. Like it's kind of like an insight into their psyche a little bit. Like this means so much to me. I want to represent it in costume and feel like I am this thing. So I love anything that they do because it's some way for us to all be creative together. So I don't know if I even have a favorite.
So do you remember the California Raisins mascot that was like the singing raisins? When you said they were dressing as raisins, that is what I'm picturing in my head. And then I realized, oh, young people probably don't see that in their head. They don't remember that commercial.
Oh, Mike Thompson just said I dressed up as a California raisin.
Nice.
Actually, I say that because my mom did that to me when I was like 4, right? And I still remember rustling around the block with the newspapers and being so mad that I'd be a raisin. And so I told him that I was going to dress him up as a raisin. So it wasn't like, so it was just easy to do. And I'm sure I was supposed to be the California raisin. Yeah, I'm sure.
Or you could paint it orange and call him a pumpkin.
There we go. I'll just spray paint the garbage bag, stuff it full of newspaper. Oh, that's hilarious.
I think the favorite costume I wore as a kid is a Zorro costume, but it was because I made it myself. So like I liberated one of my mom's towels that happened to be red. I don't know why she had a red towel. She did. And so like I tied that around my neck. I have, of course, the white button down shirt and the black jeans. And then I wore, you make the bandana, but then I made out of my dad's dowel rods. I just went into his garage and started liberating things. He was not pleased when I got home and he'd seen what I'd done to his garage, but I made my own sword. And I went as Zorro, which was fun.
See, that's the best part. It's like the creativity and intro into your psyche. We get to find out what actually matters so much to you that you're going to dress up for it. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said when you do it yourself, like just buying it out of a grocery store. It's not as personal, I don't think. I mean, obviously there's some things people can't make themselves, but at least kind of go to the effort to put something together. I dig it.
Or like borrow. So we've just started borrowing Halloween costumes. My daughter wanted to be Elsa, so we just borrowed it from the neighbor, and she's happy and so am I. So, it works.
Since we do have this going live, apparently you have to pay premium membership to go live on Twitter. So we're live on Facebook and YouTube, and that's it. But what about you guys in the audience? What was your favorite costume that you either saw or wore yourself? So Closet Studio. They like your Closet Studio, by the way.
They do. They all of my readers that are up here now are always teasing me about my Closet Studio. At least you can't see my bras this time. There's been plenty of times my bras are flapping around.
There's been one, I was listening to an audiobook, and the couple was a husband and wife team that dual narrated, and they were recording in their closet, and suddenly you heard in the background their kids running around, and then I guess it was the babysitter, their mother, someone like, "Get out of here, your mom's recording a book," and you could hear that in the background.
Oh, that's amazing.
Well, I almost am glad they left that in. There's no such thing as Twitter. Okay, it's X. Come on, Gary, you knew what I meant. It'll always be Twitter in our hearts.
Mike Thompson said his favorite was a stormtrooper. Mike, you're so tall and broad-shouldered that you probably look like an awesome stormtrooper. I would love to see you as a stormtrooper.
If he's tall enough, he should go as the Master Chief, because Halo is really tall, so you can get the scale. So
Karen was a bar wench that served shots from her boobs.
That is definitely an adult costume, but if you got it, rock it, I guess. All right, so next question. Obviously, we know you've talked about it in your newsletter, because I follow your newsletter, that you've been on a healthy living journey lately, trying to control your health issues. But if you have to go before that, we understand. But what is your favorite Halloween candy?
Oh, I got this. So my Aunt Debbie makes these carameled apples that are chef's kiss. They are so yummy. So she does the really crisp, like firm apples, really fresh. Then she does just the caramel, but then she dips them in milk chocolate. So it's caramel chocolate, and then she rolls it in Butterfinger or Oreos. She does a white chocolate with crushed up Oreos. So it's so much more than just a caramel apple. She makes them every fall, and they're in my top 3 desserts. I love them so much. So I just got home from visiting my mom and my aunts, and they sent me like 5 of them. So I have like 5 delicious carameled apples in my fridge. I'm so excited. That's my favorite.
That is awesome. So for me, it's always either Mike and Ike or Reese's, or Do It For Me. Okay, so Emily Hill said she once wore under her clothes a Wonder Woman bra and panties. Her mom didn't know she was wearing it, and it came out of the bathroom in 2nd grade in that outfit as Wonder Woman. And if you remember the original Wonder Woman, that is essentially her outfit. Like there wasn't a lot to it in the original version.
Emily, that's awesome. Favorite
that
story.
Is awesome. And her mom had to come get her, but you know what? We're still telling that story in your family, I bet. So you still won at life.
That's way better than mine.
So, and now that you've weighed in on your costumes, what about your favorite candies, dear listener, dear viewers at home?
Yeah,
Tell us what you like.
candies.
So yeah, Mike and Ike's Reese's, and I like candy corns. I know they're not popular. You either love them or hate them, but I love candy corns.
I have to bring this up. You say Reese's, I say Reese's. Like Reese's peanut butter cups. It's more like Reese is. Reese is peanut butter cups, but you say Reese's. So I'm curious too, whoever's listening, whether you say the is or Reese's. Because I swear
Good
it's
question.
Reese's.
Some of my pronunciation is just that I'm hard of hearing. I'm what the military calls an H1 category for the hearing test. Routinely noise exposed. Who knew all those explosions were bad for your hearing?
Weird, right?
I
Oh,
know,
Garrett,
right?
come on. Garrett just said the pumpkin candy corn is the best. I don't know about that.
Absolutely.
Caramel apple suckers from Emily. Those aren't bad. Those are okay. I feel like suckers.
Yeah. Nobody bet the Butterfinger. Oh, I remember those commercials too with Bart Simpson.
Yes, Bart Simpson. Nobody better lay a finger on my Butterfinger, says Mike Thompson.
Michael says candy corn is the devil's vomit.
Oh, Terry said anything chocolate. Terry, you got my number, that's for sure.
I
Karen
was
likes
never
too, but
I was never allowed to watch Bart Simpson because my mom always told my sisters and I that we were rude and obnoxious enough without help. And so the only time I actually saw Bart until I was actually an adult where I could go other places and watch it there was those Butterfinger commercials because my parents were like, no, you're not watching that.
that's hilarious. I think Garrett said that pumpkin candy corn is the best. That's like the little tiny pumpkins, right?
Yeah,
that
it's candy corn shaped like a pumpkin. It's the same candy.
It's just shaped like a pumpkin.
It's just shaped like a pumpkin. So now it's like healthy because it's a fruit or something.
Yeah,
Wait,
right. Healthy, totally.
It's a vegetable, right? We asked the important questions here. All right. So keeping along the seasonal theme, we like to be civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blaze podcast. So coffee or tea, and how do you take it? Or I understand you don't drink either, but what is your seasonal beverage of choice in this cold weather?
Ooh, so tea for sure. I love tea. I'm a big tea drinker. I drink coffee if I'm traveling, like when I'm on airplanes or if someone would buy me coffee, I'd buy it. I don't drink it regularly, but I do love tea and I like it. I like hot tea. I like chai. I like London fog is my drink though. If you get the right lavender syrup, ooh, chef's kiss. My local like coffee shop does it just right. They sweeten the London fog with honey. Anyway, I'm going off the rails here. But my favorite seasonal drink is probably wassail. I really like wassail at the end of the year or some kind of like apple cider in the
Oh,
fall.
nice. I love the smell of apple cider. I wish I liked the taste, but it doesn't do anything for me. So I'm kind of basic white girl. So I like pumpkin spice latte, Han Solo season because you got to wear the fuzzy shoes and the vest and all that. I do enjoy it though. I limit the number of that I eat or drink, I guess, just because calories are a thing. And they used to when I was working. So I worked my way through grad school as a barista, first at a private coffee shop, and then I got picked up by Starbucks because they had insurance. And they called it maple syrup latte, and it literally tasted like you were drinking liquid pancakes with syrup. It was so delicious, but the American Heart Association basically made them take it off the menu because it was so bad for you, which is probably why it was so good.
Is that a thing? Like they can do that?
I don't know. I assume it was the American Heart Association. I know medical governmental organizations said, yeah, no, take that off the menu.
Interesting. I've never heard of that. It sounds gross to me, but liquid
I remember we have you get the people that come in and order all the frou-frou drinks and they're like, oh, but non-fat milk, like that somehow makes this 1,000-calorie drink better. And I remember I was tired in my defense, but I remember this lady came in and asked, and I looked at the calories because we had like the recipe book that broke it all down. I'm like, holy crap, lady, you're drinking a Big Mac. And then they didn't let me talk to customers for a while. They kind of stuck me in the back. But that was just the first thing that came to my mind. And so, yeah, I've had to learn to pare down on the sugar.
I get that.
I can't do the monsters like the energy drinks. I've tried them. I can't get past the taste.
They taste like liquid Smarties. At least Red Bull tastes like liquid Smarties to me. My husband will let me like try his. And I just can't. I can't do it.
Red Bulls were all the rage when I was in the Army. It was that or the coffee drip. And the Red Bulls just tasted gross and upset my stomach. So it was just, you put the Folgers instant coffee that comes in the MREs, you put that under your lip like dip, and it goes straight to your bloodstream. I'm not a medical professional, and I would not recommend that to anyone. It's just the thing I did once upon a time. But yeah, I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, please don't. Yeah. Plus, probably really good for your teeth health, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can't look at instant coffee the same again. I've become a coffee snob post that deployment. But
Good.
all right, so we got that out of the way, and we've got a bunch of questions your readers asked you. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about your Kickstarter. So I am going to throw up this cover art that is amazing.
Oh, isn't it so pretty?
It's pretty. So what is going on with the Kickstarter? I know this isn't a new book, right? You're just releasing special editions.
Yeah, so I have Bianca Monroe is my biggest seller. Like she's what most people know me for. She's kind of my hottest topic. And Garrett, who's actually in the chat thread, just kept pounding me for hardcover special edition. I finally said, fine, Garrett, gosh. So we did a Kickstarter last in March for the first one, which is the red one that you saw. And now we're just doing the second one. So it has custom illustrations done on the interior by Lila, who's also here in the chat, I think, or will be soon if she's not already. She did these amazing black and white dragon pictures. For those of you that are listening and not looking, there are 3 really cool full page spread dragon pictures on the interior that start every chapter. So at the beginning of every chapter, there's a full page dragon spread. One of them is really cool that we're looking at right now. The dragon looks like it's about to eat all the words. It's like super cool. And it's so detailed. Lila just always brings my fantasy world to life. She really does. I don't know how she captures such terror and majesty in pictures. So those 3 pictures rotate through the interior of the book. So every single like chapter will have this really cool dragon illustration that opens it up. And then we have sprayed edges that will be a really pretty kind of cerulean blue, and they have it look like dragon stamps. And the exterior is a beautiful foil that's this like really deep sapphire. It's a really, really pretty blue sapphire, and it looks a lot like the first book and this one match really well together in terms of design. So it's like a black leather hardcover with the foil stamp that has like flames and castles and dragons and the title Alcar Awakening around it. So it's just this really pretty cover. My cover designer is Jenny Zemanek. She actually designed Cassandra Clare's latest Kickstarter that did like 1.2 or $2 million. She's amazing in this world, and her cover for this one, just she's never once disappointed me, and we've worked together for almost 10 years. So just bringing this team, Lila and Jenny and Inkfluence, who's doing our printing, like everyone together, they just make magic happen. It is so cool.
The dragons, and I like that it's grayscale, because being colorblind, most of the art I just pretend and I just smile and nod and let people talk like I know what I'm talking about. I can actually see this. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is super cool. So we also have, Lila did this other gorgeous map. It's a really cool map. So it has like blue and green and earth tones in it, but it has a lot of blue. So it kind of matches the blue on the cover on the outside. And so right now our Kickstarter is just shy of $11,000. So we fully funded at 8, and we've been working and cranking through stretch goals. So we passed 9,000 US dollars, which got us the bookmark. So there's a ribbon bookmark. At 10,000 US dollars, we got the sprayed edges, which is really cool. And then at $12,000, we're going to get map end pages. So that means as soon as you open the book, I mean, I'll kind of show you this one. As soon as you open the book, there's a picture right there on the end pages, but it will be full color this time.
There we go.
Yeah, it's actually the same picture. Lila did this map too.
That
It's
is gorgeous.
the same picture, only it's full color. So it would be all in blue. So right now we just need to get a couple more backers to help us cross the $12,000 mark. And then we get that full color map end page, which would be so.
Gary wanted to know if the cover was backwards because he thought the letters would be in the flame. Specifically to the blue cover here. Let me see. I'm going to pull that cover up for you real quick. This one. This is what he was asking about.
Is that the one he's talking about, or is he talking about one of the dragons? Because there was one dragon where it's like shooting flame off to the side.
Okay.
So I think the flame is like toward the, not the cover. So the flame's toward the letters. I'm not sure. I'd have to look and see. We haven't. Oh, that one. I think that's what you're talking about right there. Yeah. I actually think what happened was to put the white words against that white flame. Because if you're looking at the picture, for those who can't see it, the half of the right page is the words for the chapter, and the dragon, which is kind of over the dragon's face, and off to the left, the dragon is shooting all these flames. But the flames that Lila put in, there's a lot of white in them, so you can't see the white wording against the white flames.
Okay, that makes sense.
I couldn't like change the coding on my software, to have it be just black for those chapters. And so that's why we did it that way.
So this is a question for Layla, but no, hold on. Somebody added something. There we go. They said Layla must be a Pepsi drinker based on her skill with the art. So Layla needs to answer Coke or Pepsi, or do they not take a stance? This is important.
So there's a story here. Andy Gonzalez, who wrote that, and Garrett have a long-standing war because Garrett works for Coke, and Andy and I both drink Pepsi, and so they are always fighting over this. They are always fighting over this. So I'm sure. Yep, Garrett just chimed in. Actually, Garrett, I'm so sorry, but I'm drinking wild cherry Pepsi Zero right now. I needed Go Juice, so there's that. So there's a long-standing war with my readers between Coke and Pepsi, and Andy just gets those jabs in anytime she can.
Layla has answered neither, but never, ever Pepsi. Well, that's good to know.
Lila, she's much more purist than I think most of us are. Lila definitely like watches it a little more closely. But yeah, so now there's a war in the comments ensuing about Coke or Pepsi.
Yeah, I tried the Coke Zero. I couldn't get behind it, but Diet Coke I like. And it's not even because of the 0 calories. Like I started drinking it because I thought regular Coke was too sweet.
Coke Zero makes my stomach hurt, so I don't.
Artificial sugar upsets your stomach probably because it does mine. Okay, so one of the things I like that you did, because obviously the point of this Kickstarter is to do the hardcover and to justify the expenses, which I get. But for $15, you can get the ebook audiobook combination. You can't get that if you bought it on Amazon for the dual price. Yeah. Most of the time. That's a steal. Most of the time, audiobooks themselves are going for $30. And if you get Whisper Sync, maybe it's $15.
Yeah. So it's a cool deal because you actually not only so with the Kickstarters it's going right now because it ends on Thursday, you can get the ebook and audiobook for the first and second books in the series. So you're looking at 2 ebooks and 2 audiobooks for $15, which is really
get one. If you get the Whisper pair for a $4.99 book, the Whisper pair is $7.90 something. It basically comes to $12.50 to get one ebook, audiobook, Whisper Sync. And if they don't Whisper Sync, you don't get the discount.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So you can't get 2 for $30 or for $15. That's a steal.
So if you have listeners out here that maybe don't like hardcovers or paperback or don't want to drop $50 on a special edition, because we have both the first book and the second book available on this Kickstarter special edition to buy, they can always just support the Kickstarter and help all those readers that are trying to get these perks, but then they get the ebook and audiobook. And I do the audiobook narration. So for all of my books, there's just like 2 more books that I have to finalize before all of my 50 some odd titles are done in my book. So if you have audio listeners, which is probably pretty common for podcasters, then I'm the same narrator throughout. So you're not switching narrators, which makes it really, really fun.
So okay, so that's the Kickstarter. You're doing it to fund. It closes soon, which is why we timed this towards the end. And you've already funded. So at this point, you're just adding stretch goals.
Yep, everyone's getting it.
Yep. So with that said, you did mention that there's going to be some changes because from here we're going to kind of transition to talking about your questions that your readers sent in. But before that, you mentioned there's going to be some change to some of your audiobooks because you found buyer for the rights. Can you talk about that real quick for people that didn't catch the nuance there?
Yeah, super exciting. So I have been narrating my own audiobooks for almost 3 years now, which is really cool. I have done over 50 titles, just my own books. And Tantor Audio and I met, and they were interested in buying the Dragon Master trilogy, which is the books I talk about most here on Blasters and Blades, because they're dragons. They're super exciting, and a lot of people get into the world of Alcara through the Dragon Master trilogy. So I was re-narrating Flame, so that all of Flame, Flight, and Freedom, the trilogy. So all of the books are in my voice, and they wanted to buy the rights for that trilogy because it's so popular, especially like on Spotify and other places like that. It was so popular that they wanted to acquire the rights for my re-narration. And so I have pulled those audiobooks, and actually Flame goes live in 1 week on the 27th. So on the 27th, my narration of the audiobook for Flame goes live. And then book 2, I think, comes out in December or January. And then the Freedom, the final book, comes out, I think, in January, something around there. So this new company owns those books. And then we have some other like deals and contracts kind of in motion for other books, which is really exciting for audio listeners because it makes it more wide, just more visible and even more widely distributed than before.
So normally you've conditioned, you're an anomaly, I think, with a lot of writers. They count on Amazon only. And even if they don't want to and they go wide, but most people don't do what you did and set up their own ebook store or an audiobook store on their website. It does require a level of technical know-how. I do think freelancers are making that more accessible to most people, but I think you were probably one of the first ones in on that train. So with this selling of the rights for the Flame trilogy, there we go. Are they going to be available on your website still, or will they have to now go back to other sites to buy them?
Yeah, so that was kind of the hard thing that held me back in our negotiations a little bit because they own the rights. I can't sell from my website. The reason I decided to go ahead with it is because it was only for 3 titles. Like, it's only 3 books. Most of my existing readers have those 3 audiobooks. And then it's really the best entry point into my world. And right now we're in a position with my business where we just want to impact as many people as possible. And the way that we create impact is by getting my books into the world for people who need them, right? Because the life is hard. The days are tough. Like, people just need those to get through their day sometimes. And partnering with Tantor was a way for me to say, I'm going to give up the control over these titles and let you have them, because I think with these 3, you can do a better job of getting this book into the world for those people who need it. And then, I have all of the others that people can come to me for once they're done, because of course they'll want to keep going. There's so many more titles. So we're trying it. Like, I announced it to my readers and I was a little nervous because I wasn't sure what the response would be, because I have the coolest readers like on the planet. I'm seriously the most blessed author. And they're just so fiercely loyal to me. They would do anything for me, right? I could say I was having a problem and they would provide the body bag. And so I wasn't sure how that would go, but most people are receptive and totally understanding. A few people have been upset. But we've been able to work with them through it, and I've, been able to help them understand how to get their copy, and it's actually been fine.
Okay. So for those that are used to and conditioned to go to your website, are you going to be able to at least hyperlink it to wherever they can buy it?
Yeah, so I have it hyperlinked right now. So when you
Perfect.
click on the audio for Flame, it takes you right to the Audible landing page.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I know I saw that coming up, and I know that's a big change for you. So, and I agree with you. Like, books save lives. So I know people don't always accept that, but when I came back from Iraq, for instance, and I was sitting in the waiting room, not in a very good mental place, waiting. Like, I started reading. This was back in early aughts when like serialized fiction novellas was all the rage. Like, everyone was doing like the 40,000 and in a book every other week or whatever it was. Yeah. And what kept me alive was literally, I got to find out what happens next, so I didn't hurt myself, because, well, maybe next week, right? Books save lives. So that's one of the reasons I do the podcast, because I try to get that to everyone, right? Because if you didn't grow up with family of readers, sometimes you don't think, hey, man, this might be a fun way to pass my time. It's not intuitive for some people. That's why we do the podcast, because I do think books can change the world. So
absolutely, yeah. And
it's cool that your books are going to be able to reach more people. I still think the wolves were cooler than the dragons, but I know I'm the outlier.
So I do have a wolf series that I co-wrote with Derek Allen Sidaway. The 3rd book is coming out sometime early next year, which will round out the trilogy. But because there's 2 of us writing it, just takes a lot longer for us to get the whole process finished. And JR just loves those books more than anything.
It's like Dragon Riders with Pern, but with giant dire wolves. I mean,
dire wolves, yeah, that's super fun series. We love that series.
Yeah, I enjoy it too, but I also know I'm the outlier. I figured I peer pressured you and it didn't work, so now I've got to like move on to bug Derek and see if he'll get like book 4, 5, and 6 for me. I don't know. He's got a lot, like he's got a real job and stuff, so who knows?
He's got a real job and stuff. Yeah, I just play at home with characters that are inside my head. No, he, like, his wife just had their 2nd baby. He does work full time. He's got a lot going on. He's got another little girl that's so cute. So, and I have a 6 and 9-year-old. So collaborating just doesn't take front burner for most of us. So it just takes a little bit longer to get through it, for sure.
Although I will say the cool thing about timing of interviews with him is because his office has that amazing view of the mountains in the background. So if you can time it the right I don't know if it's daylight savings or which season it is, but if you get the right season, when we interviewed him last time, the view from his window was amazing.
Yeah, he's like legit mountain ranch guy, like has horses, is out farming in the field, like doing the legit like ranch stuff. It's pretty cool.
You just reminded me. I got to get him back on to talk about his stuff. But yeah, the view was just enough to have him back. If nothing else, I'm like, we got to time this interview so we get the view through window.
You're like, you're cool, but your view's better. So
right. I'm a sucker for mountain pictures. I actually, one of the authors I recently, we were talking about this in the pre-show that I recently interviewed, Facebook's like, oh, you're friends of you share a friend in common. You should friend it. And the only reason I did is because the picture this author had was of the mountains in the background. I'm like, dude, cool people live in the mountains.
Yeah. And actually a lot of my readers know Hunter. He's talking about Hunter, is it Wallace, right? Hunter K. Wallace?
Yeah, Hunter K. Wallace.
Yeah, Hunter K. Wallace. Anyway, some like Karen has read her book, I know for sure, and I think a couple of them bought it, but yeah. Yeah,
so she loves Emily Hill. Here, let me throw this up, and then we're going to turn. She said she loves your fantasy books, but she also loves your coffee shop series. That's how she fell in love with your books in the mountains where she lives. What is the coffee shop series? I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, so I wrote a clean contemporary romance series. There's 10 books in it. It takes place in a mountain town called Pineville. It's actually patterned after Alpine, Wyoming, where I have a cat. My family has a family cabin up there. And there's 10 books. They're kind of all interrelated. They share characters. But I stopped publishing it a couple years ago, and I stopped supporting it because I wanted to just fully focus on fantasy. So not everyone knows that I have those books. They're kind of like just a secret hanging out in Kindle over there.
Is it under a pen name or is it still under Katie?
No, it's under Katie Cross. Yeah, if you go to my author page on Amazon, you'll see the books there. It's the first book is Coffee Shop Girl. It's the coffee shop series. There's a coffee shop called the Frolicking Moose, and it all kind of takes place around this coffee shop in the mountains.
I love a coffee shop with a good name. Like one of the coffee shops I worked at when I was in grad school. So Villanova is literally set on a functioning monastery. And I worked at the coffee shop called the Holy Grounds Cafe.
Cool.
The brothers that lived on the monastery side while I was going to grad school was some of the best. Like we had some of the weirdest, like most intellectually philosophical conversations with those guys. But since that, I'm like, if you give me a cool pun on coffee name for your coffee shop, I'm in. Like Starbucks Smart. Give me a cool name. All right. So Terry, I wrote down Gordon Dixon and the Dragon and the George. I'm not sure what that is. I'll reach out to you or you can reach out to me. We're always up for new people on the podcast, so I'll look into that for you. But any other questions before we move on? It looks like we're caught up.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So let's start getting to the questions you sent in. I'm pulling up the document. The first question is, when you are reading your audiobook, is the book rewritten as a script, or do you just open the actual book and read it out loud like the readers would?
Yeah, so that's from I think it's from Victoria Smith. She's one of my rock star superstars. So she's basically asking, when I record my audiobooks, how do I do that? Like, am I holding a paperback? Like, am I reading? Is there an actual script? And what I actually do is I just open up my software, whether it's a Google Doc. It just depends on if it's a book that's already published or a brand new, like to be published book. Then I just open the Google Doc with the proofread, finalized manuscript, and then I just read from the Google Doc. I don't ever hold anything. It's all just on my computer because otherwise there would be noise and movement and shuffling. So it's all just done right on my computer screen, and I just read it right from the Google Doc.
So when you do that, how do you keep track of the accents if you don't? Like we've interviewed actual audiobook. You're an actual audiobook. We've interviewed audiobook narrators. That's their full-time job. And they always talk about, they split up the dialogue and then they have like in the margins, like this is the accent they use. Do you have to stop and look that up, or do you just keep it all in your head?
Oh gosh, no. I can barely remember my phone number. So what I do is, in my digital audio workstation, it's called a DAW. I use Reaper. You can like basically put 2 markers down and set aside a chunk of audio, and then I export it. So I'll get like a 10-second chunk of audio. And in the DAW, I just name it like Bianca Young or Marie or Derek. And then when I save that audio before I do final processing, I can like have these little snippets. So I actually have this whole library of character accents that I can look at any time, segmented by series. So I probably have 100 different accents from different places in Alcara and different audiobooks that I've done, because, sometimes I'll be narrating an audiobook, especially for Bianca, because I'm just writing her 10th novel. And someone had an accent in book 3, there's no way I'm going to remember it, but I can just go to that library, listen to like 10 seconds of them talking and be able to slip right back into it. So it takes me about 20 seconds to find them, listen, practice the new line once, and I'm usually back into it right away.
So Garrett mentions in the comments that, and we do link to your YouTube channel in the show notes, that you have some videos on your YouTube channel where you actually like record yourself recording yourself. Very meta.
So it's live recording. So I was doing a bunch of like reader request books. Readers could write in and request certain short stories, and they could watch me write them over the course of several weeks. And then I would record it out loud with them. And I'm actually on TikTok right now. My handle is at KCrossWriting, WRITING. And right now I'm just doing 10-minute audiobook lives because you can't go live on TikTok till you have 500 followers. Once you have 500 followers, you can go live. And once I can go live, I plan to do all my audiobook narration live on TikTok so you could listen to me the whole time. A bunch of audio narrators do that there, and it's a really fun way to kind of just listen and get into a book and see if you want to get it, or to just follow narrators. I have narrators there that I follow that do the same, and it's really fun to see the behind the scene process, or to see me flub up over accents, or sometimes there will be like one sentence I'll say like 5 times and I keep tripping over like if there's a D and a T close together, or like something where I just can't nail the accent. A lot of people get a kick out of watching me getting like growling and making all these facial expressions. Or I do a lot of like voice acting with it, especially as I've progressed with my talent. I'll really like kind of act some stuff out. And some people think my facial expressions are really funny to watch, which I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're hilarious.
Well, whatever makes it entertaining for the people. All right. So last year you were releasing a book a month. As a reader, this was very exciting to see one of your favorite authors releasing books this quickly, but yet it also became almost overwhelming for them. When I say that, I just felt like there wasn't enough time in between each story for it to sink in for them. Okay, it looks like I got she said they think it was good and bad. How do you feel as an author about releasing that many books as quickly? Do you see it as positive or negative?
Yeah, so this is actually from Garrett, and I loved this question. So I launched a new book the first Friday of every month for it was a year and a half. It was almost 2 years, but it was especially like in its process last year. Um, we're scaling back from that. So we've started to scale back from that slowly, and I'll be making an official announcement at the end of the year that we'll probably be launching every 2 to 3 months, probably closer to 3 months, kind of for the purposes that Garrett was saying. Like, it gives us a little time to sink in, to breathe, to come in and out, to build up excitement, that kind of stuff. And business is always changing. For me, it was a very fun experience. It wasn't very stressful most of the time, because as an author releasing books that quickly, I was always on a deadline, right? So it's always like, I've got to be here in writing. I've got to be at this stage in writing. We've got to move to audio production. There's a lot of deadlines and keeping up with it, because these are 70 to 100,000 word books. So books that are basically this size, for those of you that maybe don't know word count. So like 300 to 400 page book, 250 to 400 page books on the first Friday of every month. I was in a really good flow with it. So most of the time it wasn't too bad, unless like things went crazy, because I had, a 5 and an 8-year-old at the time. But the positives were just, so many of my readers were just so excited to know exactly when I would be launching. Like, they just knew that the first Friday of every month, they could count on that. For some readers, like he was saying, it could be really overwhelming. But for the most part, I think a lot of people just got really excited to have it coming so quickly and to not have to wait. But we are scaling back now to kind of test out, what does it look like if we do it a little slower? How do people feel about that? So we can really find that sweet spot for the readers, because everything about the readers.
Well, when you started, you also weren't narrating them as well, which is going to slow you down. And
No,
then
I was.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah.
And I know the other thing from just, as an author myself, I know from the business side, the expectation of book length has changed. They want slightly longer. So when I started writing in 2016, 60,000 was the norm. And that's what I wrote, 60 to 75,000 words. And now if it's not 100,000 because of the audiobooks, people aren't going to pick it up. So I know that also slows the process some for some authors. Has that affected you, or have you been pretty consistent with your lengths?
It was more stressful with the longer books, because I had a couple of them were 90 to 100,000 words, and I'm suddenly having to do a lot more work within the same amount of time, versus like the 70,000 word books went much faster. But I always let the story dictate the length. Like, it was whatever the characters in the story needed. It wasn't about me. So the unpredictability of it could be a little bit stressful. But other than that, like, it just kind of was what it was. And I loved the writing focus. But as always, life changes and we just roll with the changes. And so now we just shift I'll be shifting back. So my writing won't be such a main focus. Like 80% of my attention of the company won't be on just writing anymore, which I think can serve my readers even better. And that's what we're trying to chase. So yeah, it just kind of was what it was, but I think it was more good than bad from my perspective.
So William Cruz Carroll says that the audiobook for Dragon Master Trilogy Book 1 is releasing on October 29th. So he was excited about that.
So good, so worth it.
Andy, I think is what this guy's first name was, if I'm remembering.
Yeah.
This is the Coffee with Katie. I actually got into one of those, and they were interesting to see them get excited. I hadn't even read that book because I was just reading book 1 of the Dragon Master trilogy, and just to watch them like get all excited was kind of fun.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Coffee with Katie was a weekly meeting that I would do with my readers every Friday at noon and at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, just to meet with them, just kind of chat and have fun. And then we would do book club. So that would be like the first week of the month, and the third week of the month we would do book club, and whatever we launched 2 weeks before we would review then. So yeah, Coffee with Katie was really fun. I had to put it on pause in the spring so I could teach my son's baseball team and my daughter's soccer team. And then I knew I wouldn't be able to do it during the summer. We're just too busy. And so I've just been trying to get back into it as soon as like my con schedule would allow me. So that's why Andy misses it. I haven't reinstated it yet, but I'm trying to.
So you mentioned how quickly you were writing. So for you, does that include, do you outline directly, or do you kind of freebase your writing and just go with it?
Yeah, this is good because a couple of people were asking kind of like what my process is and how this happened. So we can kind of tackle a couple questions with this. So I do outline. So my process it's very multifaceted. I think better when my body is moving. And so I do most of and I'm a verbal processor, so I have to speak something to understand it really well. So what I do is I go on hikes and I talk story ideas out to myself and I record them. And so I'll figure out a plot that way and an outline. And then when I get home and I listen to those voice messages again, I get even more ideas. And so I start writing them down and organizing them. So if I have like 45 minutes of voice messages, it'll take me about 2 hours to actually work through those, write my notes out, move it around and create a plot structure. And then in that plot structure, I have a writing software that I use. I kind of copy and paste them into different documents. And then I start writing the first draft. The first draft is super ugly. It's super ugly. If I have a 90,000 word book, the first draft is probably 50 to 55,000 words. And I'm just figuring out the story. And then the second draft is the one I call I make it pretty. So I'm like putting details in and timeline and characters and consistency. And it becomes much longer then. And then the third draft, I take a break after the second draft. And the third draft, I'm going through and just doing more descriptions and finalizations and completing timeline. Then it goes to my editing team and they make it pretty for 3 to 4 weeks. And then I get it back, finalize it. And then I do the audiobook as a final proofread. And then usually we're done by that point. Some of my books require more drafts than just 4. But for the most part, especially if I'm writing in Alcara, they just require 4 drafts.
I've actually had other authors and editors get shocked when I tell them my books get longer in edit. I have never come back and done a second draft after the editor gets it and not added at least 10,000 words. I thought I was an outlier. I remember when I was in college, I was a history major, and normally the professors would be like, oh, you have to have a minimum of X number of words or X number of pages. And then they'd look over at me and be like, but you, JR, this is your max limit. Because I would write too much for them. And so I remember once, like I went from the 12-point font they wanted, because, it used to be Times New Roman 12-point font or bust was what they wanted. If you remember your college days, I did it in 8-point font. So I hit the page limit, and then they got really mad at me. So I've always been worried. I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one. If you're talking about getting longer, I was always told I was the outlier.
No, my first drafts are always shorter because otherwise I'm just trying to find the story, right? Because by the time I get to the end of the first draft, a lot in the beginning of the first draft will need to change. And if I've wasted time making that pretty imperfect just to delete it or change it irrevocably, then it just doesn't make sense. So I just say I write ugly, I write skinny, and then I start fleshing it out from there. So yeah, mine always like gain weight as it goes, always.
I think I'm the kind of guy, like I know nowadays modern writing trends are less description. academic theory is that you want to give less description so the readers can visualize it themselves. I'm the kind of guy that wants more description. I don't think Tolkien gave me enough. The trick is, of course, to target that description on the important stuff. And so that's why it makes sense that you would write your first draft light, because you don't know the story yet. You don't know what's important to describe for later. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and to kind of go with that, to anticipate a question that we have coming, someone asked if I write this way, like, or if I write and decide these ideas from real life experiences, like, how do I come up with that original plot that I walk out so that I can write these books in this process? And the reason I want to highlight it here is because so much of that process actually, yeah, like it does come from real life. Sometimes I'll have experiences in real life that I kind of work out through the story intentionally or subconsciously. Like, you'll know this, JR, like we push things into our stories that we're working on and we don't see it. But so much of what happens for me in my creative life actually really comes from my walks in the forest, which is important for my readers to know, because that is the forest. Leadham Wood is such a huge integral character in my story that I think for them to understand that Alcara as it's in my head actually really originates from Alcara as I see it in the world, because I live in the Montana mountains. And so the mountains and I do a lot of my thinking out loud. And I want them to know that so much of that inspiration and that story making and working through it actually really does happen in the forest, which is really cool.
Yeah, the funny thing though is someone has asked one of the questions, and I'm going to tweak it a little bit. We'll come back to it. But one of the questions was about like writing what you know versus writing, just letting your imagination dictate. And I'm always reminded of that scene where the CIA and the FBI started investigating a young Mr. Clancy. I don't know if he was young at the time, but he had written Hunt for the Red October, and they were for sure convinced that he had like some top secret informant like leaking information to him, so they corner him and they asked how he got all this information if someone's not leaking it, and his answer was, well, I have a library card, right? Because he just researched. And so on the one hand, you can write what you don't know by just being willing to do a little research, and then the flip side of that is you can write stuff that's happened to you and nobody will believe it. Like, I have had editors tell me to take scenes out because nobody's really going to believe that happened. I'm like, what are you talking about? I can give you the incident statement. It happened to me. Like, yeah. One of the stuff that happened to me in combat when I was in Iraq, and I put that in there, like, oh, that's so unbelievable. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Right. And so it's always weird that like readers will ask those questions. And so I thought that too, until I started writing, and editors were like, no, you can't write that. No one will believe it. And you knew it was real. Right. Like, I'm just thinking of like, there's this character he is a character, but he's a real person in World War II. He was a British officer who, instead of taking a rifle, a weapon with him, he took a bow and arrow, and he just landed on D-Day with a bow and arrow because reasons. Mad Jack Churchill was his name. And if I wrote that in a book, even though it's based on real people, nobody's going to believe it. That's just too crazy to happen, right? There's plenty of examples throughout time.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so this is a quick question about the actual formatting. So how do you decide the size of the book, the 6x9 versus 5.8? Is there a formula, or do the publishing side decide? And then towards that as well, some people do the large print, the bigger print. How do you decide when you're going to do all that, and how?
Yeah, this is a fun question because it's very specific and it's not one I hear a lot. This is from Jeanette over in the UK. She's wondering, like, how do you decide whether a book is 5 by 8 inches or 6x9 or, whatever size? So much of it is preference, but also genre preference. So a lot of I started my paperbacks at 6x9 simply because, and that's this size right here. So this hardcover special edition it's 6 inches across the top and 9 inches down the spine. That was all that Amazon and CreateSpace and those places offered for independent publishers at the time. But eventually, as this gained traction, we got a lot more sizes. And I prefer a 5x8. I think it's more compact. I think it's easier to carry. And I think it's closer to trade paperback. It's bigger than trade paperback, but closer, which is what a lot of people were more used to. And it just takes up less shelf space. And so we started to slowly integrate everything over to 5x8. So we went forward in just 5x8. And my plan is to stay there because that's what myself and other people prefer. But like the special editions are 6x9 just because they're a little bit bigger. They're more of a shelf trophy than an actual read it book, that kind of thing. And then, JR's muted. Did you know you're muted, JR?
Yeah, I just realized boomer moment. I said I don't actually have a preference on the 5x9 or 6x9 versus 5.8. I just want the author to be consistent so my bookshelf looks pretty.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah. Yeah, my readers have complained about it because the first 4 Bianca books are 6x9, so we're currently in process getting all of those changed. The thing that's interesting about that is it's more than just, like, changing the size. When you change from 6x9 to 5x8 and you're reducing by an inch, you actually have to reformat the interior of the paperback, and then you have to reformat the spine size and the ISBN placement, everything. So everything has to shrink, and then but also the spine has to get bigger, and you have to format the interior and kind of make it all fit together, and then you have to re-upload it everywhere. So it's a little bit more work than it might seem like at first. So we're just finalizing all of our old 6x9 to go to 5x8, so everything matches.
So do you also do the large print?
I
Is
haven't
that
done
something?
large print yet. I've never had anyone request it. So many of my readers are on ebook so that they can just change the print to whatever they want, or
That's what
audio.
I do. I know
Yeah.
the large print, like when I had the head injury before they found the medicine that worked, even large print wasn't big enough, but with the Kindle you can zoom. So I don't know that large print are as popular, but I know some of the romance side of the house still do regular ebook, large print ebook, and then the audio and whatnot. That's why I wasn't sure. So one of the readers asked how you stay focused when you write and stop basically like the squirrels from pulling you in other directions and other plots.
Yeah, sometimes that can be really tricky. Usually when I get into a story and I'm in a plot line, I just wanna stay there and I'm so excited. I don't often work on 2 stories at the same time. I might plan, like, or plot one story, but I'm actually writing another because it can be too difficult and exhausting to jump between. However, there is something to be said for story ideas happening while I'm writing another book, and I've gotten really good at just controlling the squirrels by just shutting their little mouths. I'll write the idea down somewhere. I have, like, this dump all place where I write all the ideas, or I'll even sometimes send them to Lila and say, "What do you think about this?" Or, like, different people or different things I'll reach out to just to get the idea off my head, and then they'll go away and I come back to them. Because almost always when an idea comes to me, I end up using it at some point, but it might be, like, 10 years down the road, but I keep it, and then that shuts it up so I can focus.
Speaking of focused, the next question they had was, do you write from start to finish? So do you write linearly like I do, or do you bounce around like weird, crazy ADD people do?
I actually write pretty I write pretty linearly. There we go, linearly. My gosh, you
You
guys.
didn't get it either, so we'll go with it.
How do I do it? I pretty much write in order because when I'm first drafting, I don't necessarily know what's gonna happen too far ahead. The only time that I've sometimes written out of order is if I'm really excited about an ending and I wanna get it down, then I'll write a really sketchy first draft just to get the emotion and thoughts and stuff out of my head because 'cause I'm excited and I'm in it. But other than that, I pretty much start at the beginning and go all the way through.
Now, you mentioned that you dictate your ideas on your walks. Do you also dictate the text, or do you go back to typing?
So, until this weekend, all I ever did was type, but I had a 5-hour drive on Wednesday and again today, and I was like, "I wonder if I could just try." I had some scenes in my head that I really wanted to get out, and I have a really busy week this week, and I was like, "Well, I'm just gonna try it." So, it's really awkward to do at first. I've tried it in the past when I was breastfeeding my daughter. I tried dictating, and I just didn't really like it, but I tried it this time because the scene was so bright in my head, and I'm in the wilds of Montana, and there's nothing, right? So I tried dictating and, I was able to get it transcribed and then the transcription cleaned up, without changing any of what I said, just cleaning up punctuation, and I read it and I was like, "That's not half bad." For, like, a first draft, like, that's, like, first draft level, like, writing from a transcription. So I just started this weekend and now I'm chewing on whether I wanna actually start like, talking out scenes while I'm hiking so I could hike longer and be quote unquote "writing," but I don't know. I'm gonna keep feeling it out, but I have tried both officially now, and it's interesting.
Yeah, the danger for you is because you narrate your own books, you've got to protect your voice a little bit more than I have to worry about, and that
That's
makes a
it.
difference for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, that's
So,
it.
do you have like a process that you do for your voice? Like, I know some people that sing will do warm up, whatever noises they make. Do you have any kind of process to warm up your voice before you record?
I don't record in the mornings because my voice is very, very different. Like, it's tonally very much lower. It just sounds a little more gravelly. It takes me a while to wake up. So I have tea every morning, just kinda, wake it up. I talk to my kids and stuff. I don't do that. I just found out that, I have severe tongue tie, so that, like, the attachment underneath my tongue, the frenulum is really, really tight, because I get headaches after I've, been recording. I have friends that will record for, like, 5, 6 hours, and it won't phase them, but I get headaches after a couple hours. So I just found out that I have really severe tongue tie that we're gonna have to take care of so I can, get my musculature the way it should. So I've just started doing, tongue exercises to
Okay.
strengthen specific muscles in my mouth to help me audiobook record better. But to warm up, I just kinda start going, and, I drink a lot of tea, and I just drink a lot while I'm doing it, and I have cough drops that I'll take a break and suck on cough drops while I walk around the house for 5 minutes, and then I come back, and that's pretty much it.
I know when my youngest was going through speech therapy, they recommended peppermint like mints that you suck on, but they have to
Mhm,
have real peppermint oil in them, and it'll do
mhm.
the same thing as a cough drop without some of the additives. Okay, so this is I had to throw the dragon back up because that's just a cool picture. Like I'm absolutely in love with that.
Yeah.
But so one of the readers had a question for you. It is kind of a two-part. Have you ever created a character that you ended up disliking so much that you were itching to kill them, but for whatever plot reason you couldn't?
This is from Andy, and I read this and I just started cracking up because this is totally something she would ask. I have been very eager to kill a lot of characters, like, I just can't wait for them to get their comeuppance. Um, is that it is sometimes hard to, like, let it keep going, but I'm also very patient because I know what the story needs, and I'm excited for the protagonist to win. So, it's never sabotaged my writing attempts, but I've certainly just felt so excited to get rid of some of our bad guys.
I have killed characters before because my first series that I wrote in conjunction with another author in his universe essentially, and my series had to wrap up into his for his last book in his
Oh,
series, and he
yeah.
changed things, which meant I had to. So I had this character that she was a young girl. I wanted to show like the Marines in this world could be super smart, and she
Yeah.
was going to grow up to be the love interest, but at this point she was just annoying. And when he changed his plot, so the timeline shrunk. Obviously, she's too young to be a love interest. I'm like, I don't know what else to do with a teenage girl. I'm just going to kill her. So I definitely feel you. I've been there. Speaking of
Oh, that's
killing,
awesome.
and this is why I told that little anecdote. The follow up to that question was, have you killed a character just because they bored you?
Yeah, I think I have, or kinda like you, JR, I gotten to a point where I'm like, "I don't know, there's nothing to do with these guys," and so I just kinda off them. Like, yeah, I mean, no one's gonna cry if you're gone, or I don't know what to do with you more, so I'm sure I have. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but that seems right to me.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the character can serve more of a purpose just by giving them a meaningful death, because then they could be a rallying cry later.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
just don't do the wash death. You know what I'm talking about on Fire or Serenity, the movie, where like they just randomly kill him when they land. And I'm like, you could have made that like so like he could have died to save everybody. You could have let him go out a hero. Instead, it was just like, yeah, he freaked, wrong place, wrong time.
I
That
think
I was gonna say that
go
annoys me in a book. I like it though. If you're gonna kill somebody, you make it meaningful.
Yeah, well, and I've also had, like, Garrett in the comments just made a comment that reminded me, I think most of the time I'm killing people because someone has to die. Right? Like, you get this, JR, like, you write military stuff, it's like, not everyone can survive what I put characters through, so it's like, someone's gotta die, right? So, you sort of are more I feel like I'm more obligated to kill some people than bored with them. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm picturing that scene where you've got it was the Shrek movie where he's like, some of you may die. It's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Like I'm picturing that scene in my head. You know what I'm talking about? You got kids. You've seen that
Yes, that's
movie.
it. If I
I,
have
I
a
feel that
meeting
way
with my characters.
sometimes.
Yep, yep.
I have that scene in my head sometimes when I'm killing people. Okay, so speaking of character deaths, this is me adding a question. Did it bother you even just a little bit when you killed someone's dad in the first Dragon Master series book?
I mean, not really.
I did not see that coming. I remember sending you a message at like 3 in the morning. I'm like, I
Yeah.
hate you.
Yeah, I actually get those messages a lot from various people in various books. There have been a couple books that I've, like, released it with sort of, like, a grimace on my face, like, "Oh, no, they're gonna hate me." Like, that certainly happens a lot. Yeah, it doesn't really affect me that much. There's certainly been deaths where I have felt emotional, like, "Oh, this is so big," like, "This is really gonna hurt," or "This is really sad. We really love them." there's one character, Martin, that whenever he dies, I'm just gonna be super sad about that because everyone loves Martin, including me, but for the most part, it has to be done.
Apparently, there's the debate again about Ellis.
Yeah, so Elis is one of my dragons,
Oh,
and right now in
Elis,
the
okay.
comments, there's a debate going on about Elis. Elis dies in a certain book, and Garrett is convinced that Elis will come back to life, but I've told them repeatedly Elis won't come back to life, but I always say I'm not in charge, that my fantasy world Alcara is in charge, and I just got out of her way, and I write her stories, but I really think Elis is dead, but Garrett's like, "Nope, he's gonna live," just like Lila's saying he's gonna live. This got so bad, this Elis lives debate got so bad that we actually made t-shirts for them to wear, and one said Elis died and one says Elis lives.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
You should do that now that you've got Layla. Is it Layla or Lila?
Lila. It's
Lila.
Lila.
Now that she's drawing these awesome dragon pictures, like you can pair the art and like make posters.
Oh,
Totally do it. That's the art is amazing. I had to throw that back up there just because I wanted to look at the art while we were talking.
No, Lila's
It's
amazing.
pretty.
She brings my world to life in ways that it's sheer magic what she does.
Absolutely. So one of the readers asked, do your ideas come to you in the middle of personal experiences when someone else says something or like says or does something that just sparks an idea? Like where do the ideas come from for you?
For sure. I think that sometimes I'll say, well, that was interesting. Or what about this? I have a 5-book romantasy series coming up probably next year sometime that all started with an idea that came in my head that was, what if dragons were the size of butterflies? And I was like, oh, like I got really excited about that and ended up having this whole story. So I do think that a lot of ideas.
Lila likes that idea. We got the heart emoji.
For sure. And also a lot of my stories are because my back is against the wall. JR, you could probably speak to this too, but you get to a point when you're writing and you're like, well, something's got to happen. Like I just wrote a scene with a Gorgon. And it's like, well, I never thought I'd write a Gorgon, but this could be fun. And you're just trying something new a little bit and just seeing how it feels. And some ideas just start like a popcorn kernel, and then pretty soon you have a whole bag, right? And it's just a very slow process. I think what I want my readers to know the most is it's a very layered process. So I start with a very basic idea, I put a layer on it, and then I come back to it and I put another layer on it, and it's a little more developed. And that's why books sometimes require 6 different drafts, because I'm layering everything so that it comes together in the right way. These books don't just come into my head as they are for the most part. Some of them do. But like Wild Rose just came into my head and it came onto the paper. But for the most part, they're layered and they happen over time.
Yeah, that's one of the things that always amuses me. Since we started the podcast, one of the main questions people want to ask authors is where the ideas come from. Like, all I can think of is how do you make them stop? Like, I don't have a problem with not enough ideas. It's too many. Like, can I just turn my brain off for just a little?
Generation is not the problem. The problem is stopping the flow. Yeah, exactly.
I have noticed this seems to be, I almost said gender, but it's a generational issue. Like you and I are of an age where we grew up before everyone was glued to a smartphone. And so we had time just in the woods with our ideas and our imaginations. And, you know, it was, if we wanted to go into a adventure in the woods, it was a bridge to Terabithia, not a video game, right?
Yes,
so that still moves me. Or where the red ferns grow.
Yes, my other favorite. Oh my gosh, you're speaking my language.
Right. And so I think people that grew up in the technology age don't appreciate like the idea of just being alone in your thoughts. And I think to a point, some of that imagination is dying culturally. Because I notice it's always the younger people asking that question. That's my theory on why. Because I get just, you know, me alone in my thoughts is where I get most of the ideas, right? Like you'll see one thing and then if this, then that, if that, then what? That Socratic loop of reasoning.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and that might be too, like my ideas often do come in the middle of life where I'm just like doing something and I'll have an idea and then I'll kind of chew on it and build something out of it later. But normally I'm doing something like out in the world, like with my kids at the grocery store, or I'm having to like, or like I said, my back is against the wall and I'm hiking to figure out the next thing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, my son is a pretty wild feral child and he has screen time, but he mostly has outdoors time, and his imagination is rampant. And so I think there's a give and take there. I think sometimes it's just different for different people.
Yeah. So for some authors, the idea comes, like the concept of the world comes to them first. For others, it's the character, and then they build the world around it. Which is it for you, or is it a little of both?
It's a little both, yeah. I mean, I've written so much in Alcara that the world is established, and it almost always starts with an idea about a character, and sometimes those characters are, like, buildings or forests, right? So I have very, like, almost anthropomorphized novels these days where, like, my buildings are actual characters, like, there's a magical manor named Wild Rose that my readers love, or the Great Library of Berk that has magical powers and my readers love. So a lot of the time it is character driven. But sometimes, there's an idea about a world that could be really fun. Like you start with the concept of a world and then put people in it. For the most part, most of my ideas start with people.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I think it's the opposite. For me, it's the world, the larger
Okay.
concept. But when you write military fiction, there's certain tropes for a reason because you were a military wife, you know how it is. Like
Yeah.
it's self-selecting to a point where like it's almost not as much of work to make the characters.
Yeah.
Like the stereotypes and the tropes in the military exist because it's real life. So it
Mhm.
makes sense if you're writing more, I don't know, romantic, or maybe that's not the right word, more emotion-based characters because you're writing the story of young women's lives. It makes sense to me that it would be the character for you first.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah,
that
yeah, I think that's a really good point that genre can dictate a lot of that.
So, have you ever had an idea that you're like, man, this sounds like a great idea, and then you realize someone's already done it and you didn't know it yet?
Um, not I don't think anyone has ever had an idea exactly like mine. I think I've been like, "Oh, that's really similar to what I was thinking," or "I've read that, someone else wrote it," but absolutely nothing is original anymore, truly, truly original, right? And I think I always have a Katie Cross spin on it. When I first started writing, I was more worried about that, but I don't even think about that stuff these days. Like, I'm just in my Alcara doing my thing.
Okay. Garrett asked a question about AI artwork versus traditional, the pros and cons. I think that needs to be its own podcast, and it's actually something Nick
Yeah.
and I have talked about. So, if you guys don't know, my co-host Nick Garber is a comic book artist. He absolutely hates AI art for a reason. Obviously, he's passionate about comics, and so it has been something that we've talked about. Unfortunately, getting because it's such a tricky topic these days. People have very strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah.
It's hard to get people willing to come on the record to have that conversation. So it's something we've been noodling over, Garrett. But if we do, you'll be the first to know because I do think it's a conversation worth having. It's just structuring it in a way that it's productive instead of adding more negative karma. Because I think there's enough of that out there already. We don't want to be that on this
Yeah.
podcast. We don't do the rage bait because it's just not healthy.
Mhm.
And with Nick and I having put our body through the things we did in Iraq, I don't need a reason to have another heart attack, right? Or another for him, a heart attack for me, right? So I try to keep the positive vibes up.
Cool.
So moving along with the ideas, which is what I was riffing on earlier. So one of the questions is, are there always stories and story arcs cooking in your head, or do you wait until you're trying to create them and then they come to you?
Oh, no, they're always in my head. Yeah, I always have about 8 different story ideas in my head that I oscillate through thinking about, and I just focus on the ones I'm currently working on the most, but yeah, I have stories I've promised readers 8 years ago that I'm still simmering on. I was diagnosed with adult ADHD a while ago, and so much of my life made sense because there's just such a wide-ranging focus on all of the different stories, but then I can hone that focus in on one single one for the time I need to.
And that tracks with your personality because you're very outdoorsy kind of thing. And before we were all living in suburbia, like the people with what we call ADHD or ADD now would have been the movers and the shakers because they had all the energy and drive to do all the things, right? Like they'd have been the blacksmith who invented all the new things because they just were
Yep.
bored.
Yep,
So it
exactly.
makes sense given what I know about your life that it would have taken until your kids forced you to slow down a little bit that
Yep,
that you got diagnosed.
for
All
sure.
right. So how long, this is a question about your journey into becoming an author. It says, how long did you work on stories before you felt brave enough to present them to the world?
I was super insecure about my stories when I was, like, in my teen years. I would write, but I was really shy about it, so I didn't tell anyone that I wrote. No one ever read my stories until I think I was in my early 20s, and I decided I'll just share them. I was working as a nurse at the time, so it wasn't, like, a closely held part of my personality. Like, well, it was, but it wasn't, like, an open part of my personality. Um, and the first time I started sharing it, it was scary just because it's like they're just reading the pages right out of my heart, right? Like they're just like it was so fascinating to me that I could just hand this book over to the entire world and they could just be reading these pages off my heart and never know that and then just go critique it, right? So that that kind of was my first experience, and then I feel like I got jaded to it over time. Like, just throw it out there now, but
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
yeah.
So this is a question. When I didn't start writing until I did a writing as therapy class at the VA post Iraq. Like I
Oh,
was a
cool.
history major, so I did a lot of writing, but it was all academic. I had to unlearn all of that when my first editor was like, "JR, you are limited to 3 commas per sentence." Because in the academic world, you remember there are a lot of subjunctive clauses, and you might get a paragraph, or I mean a sentence that's a paragraph that has like 12 commas in it, grammatically correct, stilted as hell to read, right?
Yep.
And so for me, like my writing didn't come till older, but looking back on it, I realized that when I finished a story that I really liked or a TV show that I really liked, the story would keep going in my head and I'd insert myself into it, into the world. So did you do that when you were younger before you started writing the stories down? Were you already thinking in your head in terms of story?
100%. Yeah. I think I was born thinking in terms of story. I was writing stories in my journal in 1st grade. Um,
Nice.
yeah, like the moment I could write stories, they were on paper. Like I still have the journals with these stories. I was like outside playing in the snow or something in the story. Yeah, I was always, and then I feel like inserting myself into the stories that I read got me through high school, right?
Yeah.
Like I could be the fair maiden or I was in Lord of the Rings with the Hobbit. Like, there's like so like I was sobbing at Where the Red Fern Grows or I was Laurie Ingalls Wilder. Like inserting myself into the story, I think is what saved my lonely childhood because I wasn't so lonely then. So absolutely. And that still happens to this day when I'm writing sometimes.
Okay. All right. So the next question for you is, do you ever make physical representations of your fantasy world before you could flesh out the whole story? So I'm thinking probably in terms of maps or character art or just art in general. Does that come first or later?
Um, I've never really represented my stuff through actual art unless I am trying to spend time with my daughter. She loves art, she loves to paint. So sometimes when I'm like stuck, I'll stop working and I'll say to her, "Let's do some art together." And she'll always say yes, and then I'll try to like just paint the scene that I'm stuck on. So it'll look awful. Like it's a joke saying that I'm even painting with Lila here in the comments. But sometimes I'll do that if I'm stuck on something or my subconscious is chewing through it, but other than that, I haven't ever really represented myself, my fantasy world any other way but just in the words. Other
So
people do, but like Garrett and Lila and Terry, but not me.
I know in one of your other interviews, you've mentioned that you scene block sometimes with your husband when you're doing the combat stuff
Yep.
because obviously his skill set in that regard. Do you do that from a topographical standpoint? Like when I write combat scenes or action scenes, I make a 3D representation of the terrain and then I plan it out so that way I understand what they're seeing from each
Yeah.
vantage point. Do you do that kind of stuff given that you have the military as your husband? He
Yeah.
has all the same skill sets to do that with you and for you?
Yeah, I certainly have had well, like, when it comes to fight scenes, I'll have my husband, like, work it out with me, especially if it's, like, grappling or swords or something, we'll have, like, sticks, and I'm just trying to make sure, like, my directions in the scene make sense, and he'll kinda point stuff out. I will do that, and then if there's something physical, topographical, I will grab a napkin and a Sharpie and just sketch out a very rough, like, "Oh, the hills are here, the mountains are here, they're going here, okay," and it's very not professional at all, but I just need to, like, know in my head where the compass points are and what to kinda say.
I
You're
did.
probably way more detailed than I am.
So I grew up as in the infantry. I was, your basic grade A grunt. And so for me, like I literally will make a 3D representation. So I remember my first battle scene that I wrote, I had like sponges for the mountain ranges and I stole my kids' Lincoln logs and build the blocks to build like the different forts that were around. And I had the
Yeah.
little green army men where each represented a battalion and I'm like planning it out. And then of course, as I moved, like I would subtract as this unit died and would like move units around. But that meant I had to leave it up as I was writing. And it took me 2 months to write that scene. And eventually my wife was like, JR, I love you, but I need my table back. We can't keep being on the couch. And so I had to write faster so she could have her table back.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
But
Love
I know
that.
not at this point I can do it. Like you said, I'll sketch it out because I realize that's just not practical.
Mhm.
And yes, I know we're cutting close to your listener on time. So we've only got like 5 questions left from the list.
Cool.
So do you have a spreadsheet for your every character, like a list of your character's strengths, weaknesses, who they love, who they hate, to keep it in your head, or like how do you track the characters?
Oh, I totally have a spreadsheet. I have this giant spreadsheet. It's like the column letters are like triple at this point. There's like BXV or something. So I have one part of the spreadsheet has a timeline. One spreadsheet has like characters, one has places, one has currency, one has magic systems. So I have this one spreadsheet on Google Docs or Google Sheets that kind of holds all of Alcara. So I can look characters up to get their descriptions, like their eye color, their age, their birth date, or I can look at a timeline to see where things are happening. There's no other way I could do it.
Okay, I actually, and some authors will do this because I've talked to other authors as well. They almost use like a D&D or RPG character sheet almost, and they just make one for all the important characters, and that can work too. Do you have it to that level of detail where like they're this tall, they have this color eyes?
Probably not as detailed as some of them are. I just do the pertinent things that I know might be repetitive later or unique characteristics. Like he has a lisp or he says me instead of my, or like he was born here, this was his job. So I just do anything that sort of is identifiable and that I could use later to keep them familiar to my readers, but I don't decide things that I don't mention directly in the books, if that makes, like, I don't create a whole character profile. I just gather the information as I write, and then the other details I would just decide if I need them, if that makes sense.
It does. There's a danger. I realized that myself, was that if you're not careful, you write all the details, and then it's like, well, crap, which of this is actual canon and made it into the book, and which is not? And if they contradict, how do I? And so you're right. If you add too much too soon, you can confuse yourself and add more work.
Yeah, and like some of it just you end up not even needing, and then you did all this work for a profile that you didn't even need.
So when we talked about the blocking, this asks the question. You write, like, obviously modern world, it's easy to get, toy guns or whatever to picture that. But you're writing medieval, so swords, bow and arrows, and all of that. Do you actually get physical equipment that you can get a feel of, so you feel how it balances, or do you just describe like what you've seen on TV because you can visualize it?
It just depends. Like I certainly have gotten like sticks and worked out sword routines. We have bows and arrows. We have like that kind of stuff. I don't go crazy in depth with it because again, I don't think that's necessarily needed. But I do bring in people that help me with the details if I need it. So when I wrote
Okay.
The Sword Maker, I worked with a professional blacksmith to help describe the different types of swords, what their weights might look like, how their composition might be, that kind of thing, because I needed that level of detail. So I just called a professional in, but I didn't engage with those weapons myself because I didn't know where to find them and I didn't want to waste the time looking for them. So I just had someone else read the story and help me fill in the appropriate details. So I do more of that when it applies.
Okay. So the next question is, how can you create such a lovable character with such deep flaws that we have to love them so much, then turn around and do the same deep flaws in a character that we have to hate them?
This is from Mark Peterson. And I'm just going to say that I'm rather diabolical, Mark, and I stay up at night thinking of ways to make you lose sleep.
All right. So the next question is, how does your writing process work? Do your stories manifest in full? Do your characters start speaking to you one at a time? Do you create an outline? And is this your process sometimes different book to book?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about the outline. My process is the same every book, but the experience is different every book. So I kind of do the same flow, but it hits differently every single time. Like if you talk to my editing team, I'm like, this was a wild one, or this one happened so fast and quickly, I'm worried it sucks. Like, so the experience is different, but the process is the same. We talked about the outline. What were the first parts of that question?
So they wanted to know, does your stories manifest itself in full, or do you get it with the characters starting speaking to you? And I think you've answered part of that when you say your character first.
Yeah, so I've had 1 or 2 books where the story manifests in full. So Wild Rose, which I just launched this summer, I sat down and wrote the entire plot in like an hour and a half, and then I didn't deviate from that plot. I just wrote it straight through, and I've hardly ever had that happen before. It just kind of like came. That one was pretty amazing.
In the artsy fartsy world, they call that flow state.
Yes, it was flow state, but I'm in flow state in a lot of books, but it doesn't come that easy.
No.
Other ones, it is a little more piecemeal. So, like I said, I sometimes back myself to the wall and I have to figure out something and what happens next. I think that's far more common where I know this much and so I write it and then I go, well, something else has got to happen. So I'm just gonna try something else. I'm gonna throw some spaghetti against the wall or whatever and try to move it forward that way. So it's same process, different every time. It comes in pieces, very rarely comes fully developed.
So James, he sent me a DM. He wanted to know about your process of working with SMEs, subject matter experts. I think that one's going to be in depth enough that the intersection of subject matter experts in fiction would be its own podcast. We'll invite you back to that one because I know we're
that'd
short
be
on
awesome.
time.
I have a lot
I
of
do think
experience.
that's worth diving into because
Yes.
everything you write in book, the rule of cool has to win. So sometimes you're not always factually correct, and so that's a balancing act. So I think that deserves to be its own podcast. So the next question, because we got two left, is your cover art. So when you choose cover art, is it created from your imagination? Do you choose a template that are already created, or do you, and I'm adding this third part, or do you let the the artist do their thing?
Yeah, so I have worked with Jenny Zemanek, who does my covers for like 10 years now. So I literally just say, here's the premise of the book. Here are some symbols that might pull you in, do your thing. And I give her full like free reign, just like with Lila. Whenever I've worked with Lila on children's books or pictures, whatever, I just say, I don't know, Lila, you like Alcara speaks to you, do what's in your heart, because they do so much better than I ever would. I try not to art dictate unless there's something very specific that I need them to represent. And then I just say, these are the specifics that my readers would love to see. However you present that is your own. So I don't have hardly any stress over covers because I always know, or design really, where Lila comes in with these Kickstarters and other things that we do together. I just trust them to do it. I know some authors get a little more nichey or try to do it themselves, but for me, I let the authors that I trust or the creators that I trust tap into their expertise, make something beautiful, and I almost never have changes. Like I said, it's not perfect.
When you've got someone who's an expert at something, be they a gourmet chef or an artist or narrator, if you micromanage, sometimes the finished product isn't as good. When you give them free range to be their own artistic self, they surprise you. My best covers for the anthologies I've done, where I just give the general idea and I let the artist do their thing. I found when I try to dictate too much, and I'm sure this is pretty universal, the finished result isn't as good because they're artists in their own right for their own reasons. And if you give them the space to be artistic, they will blow you out of the water almost every time.
It's so cool. Yeah. And the trust is there. I think it's too, because not only do I trust the people I work with, but I just trust in general that it's going to be better what I would have done.
So the last question, it sounds like it'll be a little bit quicker to answer. It says, I've always wondered how an author or publisher decides which idea is worth pursuing further and which idea will be abandoned. I do know, just purely from a number sense, there's programs like KDP Rocket Publishers Rocket now, where you can look at the metadata behind Amazon and Barnes and Noble and see what ideas are looked for and what sell. But that's assuming you're following a trend. And sometimes you got to set your own trend. So assuming you aren't following the raw data, how do you decide on an idea?
So for me, I kind of avoid this decision because I have my readers choose a lot of what I'm publishing from the get-go. So I say, here are 4 ideas that I love and want to do. You pick which one you want the most. So I know from the beginning what ones I'm going to move forward with. So I do that. I have had a series where the sales are so low and the process was so difficult that we're not sure we're going to continue it. But as we continue, as it was discussed and looked over, it came down to both data and instinct and what could we do with these assets. It was more of like a logical decision versus not. And I think that's different across the board. I know some authors that say if they don't show a 50% read through within 3 books of a series, they cut the series. There's a lot of different factors for it. It just depends on the business owner, the author, and what it looks like.
Absolutely. So we have a few minutes left. Is there any last minute questions anyone wants to ask before we wrap this up? Because we went through all the prepped questions already.
Oh, there's a lot of them. Good job, JR. Handling that flow is difficult.
Yeah, I think the subject matter expert, I wrote that down on a side note for myself to come back to. I do think that deserves its own podcast. And the same with the AA art for Garrett. I do think those are nuanced conversations enough that to treat them properly, they deserve their own hour. Yeah. But is there anything else anyone has before we wrap up? Going once, going twice. All right, Katie. So you did mention you're not writing as much anymore. Not as much. You're paring down the writing to focus on the business. So what are you writing at the moment?
I'm finishing up Bianca's 10th book. So the character that I'm doing the Kickstarters for, her 10th book comes out in December. So we're finishing that up. I am plotting another story. I'm second drafting a different one. So I kind of have a couple different projects. I'm trying to wrap all these little parts up to get them off so I can focus on Bianca book 11.
All right. And this is the part, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, and they really are important. Speaking of reviews, can they review the books on your website for your loyal readers that buy from you direct?
Yes, they can. If you go to katiecrossbooks.com, you'll get discounts and you can review them there so other people know if they want to read it.
All right. Was there anything else about your Kickstarter or your process you want to tell people before we wrap this up?
Just go support the Kickstarter. If you type in Alcara Awakening on the Kickstarter platform, should pull it right up. You can buy book 1 and book 2 in hardcover, or you can get the ebook or audiobook. Or if you just want to throw $10 at it and support all the readers that are trying to get those map end pages, that would be awesome. It closes on Thursday, which is October 24th, I think.
Yep.
24th. It closes this Thursday, October 24th. But it will be open to late pledges if you see this after that date.
Okay, and where can listeners and readers find you on the Wild Wilder interwebs? And as usual, in the show notes, dear listener, when you go and watch this, it will be there.
Yeah, so the best place to find me is katiecrossbooks.com. You can get my first book, Miss Mabel's School for Girls, to read there, or any of my others at a discount from the retailers. We're available anywhere books are online in ebook, audiobook, and paperback. We also have a fun Facebook group called The Witchery if you want to meet other young adult fantasy readers like yourself. And I just started on TikTok like 3 weeks ago. I'm at KCrossWriting, which is really fun. So go follow me there because we're having a good time. And the more people follow me, the sooner I can do the live narrations there.
Absolutely. All right. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only, people. Send the shenanigans over there to Madam Stabby Stab on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. Also linked in that handy Linktree. And we have a website over there on Spotify, a bunch of gobbledygook. Trust me, you don't want me to give out all the random letters. I hate Spotify for doing that to us. All the updates. Anyway, but if you go to the website through the Linktree, you could support the podcast for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. These episodes aren't free to produce, and every penny counts. Or you could support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till they float away on a river of Java. Speaking of that coffee brand coffee, link is in the show notes. Discount code podcast Grunt. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. You support an American business, and it looks like soon they will be shipping overseas. So if you are not in the continental US, then you have options coming soon. But I still encourage shop local wherever possible. And even if that's not coffee brand coffee for you Aussies that are listening, shopping local is good for everybody. So with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my absentee and insane co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thank you for coming on, Katie. This was a lot of fun. We might have to do some more live shows. You've convinced me it's going to be fun. So It's all your fault. And with that, we will end the stream. Wait for it. No, don't start cussing yet.